and I was able to build a pretty big company in McAfee. And then I became CEO of, or I became chairman of two cool companies, one called FireEye and one called Mandian. And I liked those two companies so much, I became CEO of FireEye and then acquired Mandian and grew that company. And that just, was the beginning of many, many chapters I hope to come with my career. I then founded NightDragon, which is named after a famous cyber attack we could talk about. And I really wanted to build something generational.
Welcome to the LoJo Show. Thank you for joining us. We are habitually complacent. My baloney has a second name. It's M-A-Y-E-R. What? There's always a persistent threat. There is no monopoly on good ideas when it comes to cybersecurity. Welcome back to the LoJo Show. I'm your host, LoVichter Jones. I have over 22 years of cybersecurity experience, and I'm honored to bring some of that experience to you. Today, we have a special guest who needs little introduction in the cybersecurity community, Dave Dewalt. Dave is the CEO of NightDragon, a seasoned leader with a storied career in tech and cybersecurity. From his humble beginnings in Pennsylvania to leading major companies like McAfee and FireEye, Dave has been at the forefront of cybersecurity innovation. His journey is a testament to perseverance, vision, and an unyielding passion for securing our world. Thank you, Dave and NightDragon, for joining us, and welcome to the show. With that, let's jump right into the episode. All right, excellent. All right, guys, welcome back to the LoJo Show. We're here today with Dave Dewalt. Dave is the CEO of NightDragon. I'm going to let him do really the full-out presentation of himself because I don't think anybody can do that better than him, to be honest with you. So, Dave, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, man. So let's get it done here. Give us a little background here, kind of discuss your background from a CEO standpoint, how you kind of came into the tech world, and just a little bit of a background about yourself.
First of all, LoJo, thank you for having me, and I just love your name. So, LoJo, when you have cool names like LoJo versus like common names like Dave, who would ever want to go to the Dave show, right? You got to go to the LoJo show. It's way better and more fun. So thank you for having me. And we'll try to make cyber cool today, I guess, and national security and things like that. But we'll do our best. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And good to see you.
Awesome. Yeah, man. This is great. One of the things, guys, when we look at Dave and in the background, it is very distinct and very diverse as well. So cyber, if you think cyber is just a boring one-way stream and it's just a uniform way, you got that wrong. One of the things that I wanted to ask you first is really kind of how did you come into cyber, just as far as in building your background and career and stuff too?
Yeah, LoJo, I grew up pretty modest means. I grew up in kind of the blue collar world of Pennsylvania and the coal regions area. My parents just did an amazing job early on trying to get me acclimated to computers. And I'll be really dating myself now, so don't make any snide comments to me. But I remember when they bought me my first computer, like an Atari Commodore 64, and I took it apart. I wanted to learn how it worked. And from there, I started taking, classes in computers. And eventually I got a computer science and electrical engineering degree from University of Delaware. And, it just really piqued my interest in the world of technology. And that really prompted me to drive across the country and no job, no money, and moved to Silicon Valley and literally had no money and, decided to, embark my career in the West Coast. And, sometimes better lucky than good. It was a period of time of great growth in the high-tech sectors. And I began to learn a lot about the industry working at companies like Oracle Corporation, where I learned a lot about sales and technical sales and databases and database security. I helped build a company called Quest Software along the way that did database security, but also tuning products for the database, table space management, monitoring for the database. And it really started to give me an appetite for what was possible in the world of security. And during that time, we started to see the bad guys start to show up, LoJo. And, when I first really got my entry into security, I was CEO of Documentum, what was considered a document management company, but we did a lot of special security for document access and control rights. And then over time, digital rights management to really help secure documents for the enterprises. And one of the areas we sold to was the government. So I got a pretty clear view of partnering with the government and agencies that really govern industries. And that gave me even more appetite. My company Documentum got sold to EMC for, at the time, a pretty amazing $1.9 billion. And they then acquired a company called RSA, which I think all the cyber people will know. And all of a sudden it was really game on for me, because getting RSA and having a chance to manage RSA as president of EMC gave me even more appetite for the industry. And when I served my time at EMC, what a wonderful time it was, I ended up taking the CEO job of McAfee. And McAfee was really fun because at the time it was like the scariest thing we saw in, the world of viruses was like, I always say the I love you virus. And it was like, wow, that scary virus that would pop up and say, I love you. And that's all it did. And it didn't do much more. But as you know, over time, those viruses and Trojans and parasitics and polymorphic type viruses really grew. And I was able to build a pretty big company in McAfee. And then I became I became chairman of two cool companies, one called FireEye and one called Mandian. And I liked those two companies so much, I became CEO of FireEye and then acquired Mandian and grew that company. And that just, was the beginning of many, many chapters I hope to come with my career. I then founded NightDragon, which is named after a famous cyber attack we could talk about. And I really wanted to build something generational and investments and advisory into the security tech market. It gave me a platform to scale. Instead of just being a CEO of one company like a FireEye or Mandian or McAfee, I could start to invest into many companies, and I could do it where the threats and risks were the greatest. So the building of NightDragon's mission, we call it securing our world for tomorrow. You always got to have a good mission statement and tagline, but really an honor. So it's now a lifelong journey, 20 years of cyber already. But now, I hope many, many more years and generations from here, we can talk about NightDragon. So sorry for the long intro, but there you go.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, I think one of the things we'll learn in this is that this is an insatiable passion for you as far as looking at it. I mean, most after the first sale would have been like, I'm just going to go and kick back for a little bit and, find out. But you have stayed integrated in this industry, leading some of these areas too. And I think one of the things that's unique with NightDragon is the different aspects of cyber and technology that you guys are covering, which is absolutely needed because, before, like you said, we were just talking about viruses, and then we got into more of the polymorphic type entities and stuff too for that. And then now it's just so pervasive in all aspects, supply chain, endpoint, just your general personal information and stuff too within that, as far as on how that's shared in the leagues that go on that from a mobile security standpoint. So as you look at defining NightDragon's different areas and aspects and investments, what's been kind of the key driver as far as being diverse as you guys are at this point?
Yeah, let me answer the first question, because you made a pretty good comment. The intangibles of life, the X factor. You were an athlete, I know, and it's, I always said during a lot of parts of my career, I called it fun, learning, money, and mission. And the hierarchy of needs of like times when I was having a family, it became pretty money oriented. Early in my career, it was very learning oriented. Now it feels very mission oriented. And while I really want to make my shareholders money and help everybody, prosper from this, and we will, the mission side has become even bigger. How do we create peace? Is there ways for private companies and sectors to help make a difference in the world? And after all the threats and all the things I've seen, thousands and thousands of breaches and events and different things that are going on, it really opened my eyes to, what the rest of my life can hold, which is to really try to make the world a safer place. But to answer your question, LoJo, we look for the biggest risks and threats in the world. So we study it at NightDragon across the whole universe of what I call security tech. So almost think it like biotech, fintech, health tech kind of things. Security tech is encompassing now of all five major domains. So if you study the history of the world, right, mankind was largely on land, then they were on oceans, then they were in the air, then they were in space, then they were in digital, right? So most people think about five major battlegrounds for which humans are conflicting over, lands, oceans, air, space, and cyber. And we try to look for security technology that really is helping to solve a threat or risk in any one of those five domains. So, of course, the digital domain or the cyber domain is a big one for which we have a lot of experience, but also space and the race to space has become a big threat and a big risk. Air domains, you don't have to look very far to drones and counter drones and what's been happening with electronic warfare. Oceans and what's happening with what's called ASVs now, where these autonomous surface vessels that are creating havoc in the Black Sea, the Red Sea, the South China Sea, but also, on land, and saving lives and maybe even creating jobs have all become threats and risks that we've seen where we could make an investment into some big area of threat or risk and maybe do good while also making money. So that mission and money became the combination. Supply chains, industrial networks, etc., are all areas we focus on. But we stay specialized in the world of security and safety. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I think one of the things that listeners, especially when we talk about even DoD, government, federal agencies and stuff too, and then also companies, is that have that shared Venn diagram now, across the board now. It used to be that, government, most important thing was confidentiality and stuff too on that side, right? For us, it was, for corporate and stuff, it was making sure we had our availability and stuff that had to be good. And then also as far as the information and data, whether it was financial information or whichever, that the integrity was in line, for that. But now you just have this gigantic overlap now within that, where you also have the cyber physical world and stuff for that. So I think it's unique that looking at the threats across the board, not just the typical cybersecurity threats, but also threat to life, to safety, and then also to overall apparatus in which we live on and depend on, is one of the keys that I believe that you guys are beginning to hit the mark on. Like you said, whether it's your portfolio companies, but what have you seen as far as the evolution of cyber leaders in relation to our current state as both as a country and as a world? Have you seen kind of a new evolution of those leaders, and how has that changed from back in I'm not going to give away your age, but from back in the 90s to the 2000s to now?
Thanks for being kind. I'm only 40. So just for the record, for those who know me on LinkedIn might know I'm a little older than that because I posted, but you hit on a key topic, LoJo, that I thought was worth talking about for a second. And I've been talking about this for a couple of years. And I first talked about what I called this perfect storm in cyber. And for 20 years, I've literally been using the term perfect cyber storm. And it's not changed. If anything, we went from hurricane level 1 to 5, because now the attack surface has gotten bigger. Technology keeps creating inertia, vulnerabilities because of capitalism. People don't secure the product by design. Therefore, they race their product to market. There's all kinds of security vulnerabilities. When I was first CEO of McAfee and, at RSA, we had a handful of bad guys around the world. Now we have thousands of bad groups that we track. And some of them are government, some are proxies for government, some are crime groups, some are just activists or hacktivists. I mean, the variety of attackers that are all over the world has just exponentially grown. We put geopolitical tensions, domestic divisiveness, and you have a storm that just keeps growing and brewing without a lot of retribution for doing bad things. When do you see people get arrested? So you just have the storm growing. And then to the comment that you made, around cyber physical, what I've watched now is the cyber domain has become somewhat ubiquitous or omnipresent within all the other domains. So we now have to be careful about, wow, there's a physical attack that's occurring. There's a shooter. Well, how do we use digital to enable better response to a physical threat that might be occurring? If we had video surveillance capabilities or computer vision AI, maybe we'd be able to have eyes on a shooter scenario like we had with the president over the weekend. Technology's there now. And it doesn't just take humans looking at rooftops. We have technology, and these are things that we're investing in, is that kind of area, but cyber physical, cyber AI, cyber supply chain, cyber space, cyber industrial, cyber blockchain. These are all morphing areas into cyber, and I call it fusion, like future fusion, but all these markets are fusing together into one big security tech space that really now chief information security officers have to be more responsible than just cyber. They got to be thinking about supply chains and physical problems and other types of things for their companies as well. And now things like narrative attacks, misinformation, disinformation attacks. We watched all weekend this happening. So the point about that, the leadership in cyber has to change, because the traditional moats of like, I got a network, I got a firewall, I got an IPS, I have a DLP, I've got a web gateway. Yeah, I got racks and stacks of appliances. Now my defensive mode is gone. It's in the cloud. It's remote worker. It is a hard job. And then you put all the physical risks and supply chain risks and everything else into this. Cyber leaders who are running security defense have a much bigger role and are much more important than ever before, and are almost elevated. Well, almost, they are being elevated into boardroom conversations constantly. The shareholder risk is incredibly high, as we've seen with breaches that are occurring. So the perfect storm has become a perfect risk, which really creates a perfect leader needed to solve that risk. And there's where we are in 2024.
Let's pivot on that. One of the emerging things when I talk to my friends and to my colleagues that are senior leaders, CISO level, vice president level, one of the key issues is the understanding of the CEO and the board on the impact of cyber. And then the other part is, what is the real liability for the company and the company's personnel when it comes to cyber breaches, cyber issues, or even non-compliance stuff too from an SEC standpoint. What's your outlook in those areas as far as how the CEO, the board, CFO can do an even better job in enabling the ease of countering a lot of the cyber threats for organizations, and for continuing to build programs that, still allow you to be profitable, but also are balancing that risk appropriately? I know that it's a very gentle and delicate balance, but this is my first time really speaking to someone that has both views of the world there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic and a big answer, but I'll try to do it in 2 minutes. But I would just tell you, we've come a long way, which is really encouraging, right? When I first was in the cyber industry, the CISOs reported way down the organization, had very little line of sight to senior management in a company, almost no sight into the board, almost no sight to the shareholders. We've risen the visibility and the importance of a chief information security officer. That's been good, but we have a long way to go. Last summer, we put out a report, NightDragon, where we really studied the S&P 500, really tried to look for how much talent was really at the board level, especially at public companies. And it was a startling small number. I mean, the number like 1.4% of the S&P 500 actually has a security expert on the board. I mean, 1%. I mean, does anybody think that's a problem, right? And even if you got more generous and said you actually have a technical person on the board, the number was still pretty small. More than half of all S&P 500, even Fortune 2000 companies, don't only have a technical expert on the board. So more than half the companies don't have a technical expert. How do they even understand the technical opportunity or risk, let alone the cyber threats and risks? So therefore, boards still have a long way to go, I think, in learning and understanding this risk. And shareholders have a long way to go in learning this as well. one thing you see, LoJo, is you rarely see two companies that look alike when they manage cyber risk. And what I mean by that is it starts with, do you track that risk in your enterprise risk management dashboard? Every board, audit committee, or risk committee has an ERM. They tend to study their risks. And first of all, where is cyber in your ERM? What kind of metrics are you tracking around your cyber risk? What kind of dollars are you applying towards that risk? How do you report against that risk? How do you report to shareholders the risk factors in your 10K and your Qs? And how do you look at the governing engine of cyber risk? It's hard to find two companies who do it the same. In fact, I tell you, there is no two companies who do it the same. And therefore, that creates a risk too, because we haven't created what I think of as like a Sarbanes-Oxley-like moment in cyber where everybody had to report accounting of revenue the same way. And, I have a tattoo, 404, 302, from learning revenue accounting with Sarbanes-Oxley as a public CEO. We haven't had that moment yet in cyber where we all consistently report. Now, the SEC did a little bit of work in the direction of incident response reporting. This is great. Again, directionally correct. But we got to get standard reporting, standard risk management, better expertise. And it's an important area because when you see 1 billion records from AT&T out on the internet, and it's a wake-up call to realize how vulnerable we are. Even the best companies with the best CISOs, with the best security spending have risk. And we got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always ran into, or that I always ran into as far as in working with boards and then also with internal and external counsel, was trying to determine things like, well, what's materiality within these organizations? What's considered materiality, right? We talk about consequences and stuff, or small consequences for these things. But the thing is it's very hard for people still to articulate what is materiality in terms of loss, damage, what can we be slapped on the hand for, I think is what it ends up coming down to in those discussions. How have you been able to navigate that as a CEO?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy answer, and there's no clear, here's black and here's white and here's, it's gray. It's all gray. And what is materiality to one company is not materiality to another company. And therefore, it's not easy to just say, here is a materiality threshold. Although if you look at the SEC and what they tried to create with materiality, again, a step in the direction of trying to create some terminology to this. But at the end of the day, wow, I lost 1 billion records of my customers. Well, I call that pretty material, or, a substantial amount of your records. Well, wait, I lost the intellectual property in my source code to my product. And I probably think that's pretty damn material, but did I lose any revenues? Did I hurt my shareholder? Maybe not in the near term. I responded to 5,572 breaches. Talk about virtual tattoos. 5,572 breaches while CEO of FireEye on American soil alone. These were Chinese intellectual property thefts, 5,572 of them during my time. Confirmed thefts of intellectual property. That's a fact. Now, none of those got reported. I wouldn't say none, but most did not get reported because they lost some source code, or they lost some IP to some recipe, or how to build something, or how to do something. But guess what happens 3 to 5 years later? There's a Chinese company competing with you now in your own market. So in hindsight, look quite material. So these materiality thresholds are difficult to come up with, but in a lot of ways important. But if you let the company define the material thresholds and you have some oversight to understanding that, I think the self-reporting can be a step in the right direction.
Okay. All right. That's fair. When we look at these companies and these organizations, we start looking at things like the promise of AI. We're at the RSA conference this year. I don't think I went into one conversation that AI was plugged in some way. And it could be anything from, a truly trained, automated AI to, a little widget in the corner of the screen.
Did you change your show to LoJo.ai now? No, I'm joking.
I should. You know what? I should just say, everybody else is doing it. I should jump on the bandwagon too.
If you do it, I'll do Dave.ai. We'll have it together.
And then we can all use Jet AI after that. But as far as when you guys look at AI, the preponderance of it at this point, where it is in the maturity, how do you think organizations or companies and leadership are really perceiving AI and how that can assist them in the cybersecurity world at this point? And I'm talking more of the Fortune 500s, not necessarily tech savvy CEOs, but CEOs that are more so business in that case, and really, again, are looking at things from a threat standpoint. How do they translate that based on your experience?
I'm going to start out a little ominous and a little dark, and then I'm going to get positive. So I'm just going to warn you, I will get positive, okay?
All
but,
right.
My head hurts because when I look at major innovations, major evolutions of technologies over the last 20 years, whenever we've seen a really big new technology come, we really failed to deploy security at the time that technology rolled out. Just look at the internet itself, or mobile phones, or mobile applications. I mean, pick any category you want, blockchains, things like that. And you realize that here in the world of generative AI, and particularly AI before that, the race for capitalism, again, that perfect storm now applied to AI security is kind of happening, right? So we're racing to put out development tools, and the power of ChatGPT, and from 3 to 3.5 to 4 to now 5, the engine of innovation with the transformers and the ability to really unleash AI capabilities is so strong. But yet you look at the security behind that, and it's very painful, because you have one of the biggest dislocations of technology to security I've ever seen. And you were part of one, IoT security and industrial securities, all these devices connected to your network. And then sooner or later we went, oh shoot, maybe we have a problem. There's a lot of devices connected to the internet. Are they secure? Are they not? And they're on my network. And I realized that 5 times more IoT devices than I thought I had on my network. Well, guess what? You have 5 times more AI development happening in your company than you realize. So the first problem we have to solve, LoJo, is visibility matters in security. We know that everywhere we go. So do CISOs know what is happening with AI in your company? Because guess what? When that employee goes home, that data scientist goes home, that data scientist isn't super security aware and literate. They're downloading LLM onto their computing device, exposing your privacy data to a public model, and bad things can start to happen. Poisoning, hallucinations, model shifting, things that can go on, such that you just created a risk for the company. And when you start to understand visibility of AI usage in a company, it is an oh shit moment. If there's ever an oh shit moment, AI and development there is one of those. So the ominous part of this conversation is like, wow, that genie's out of the bottle. The deployment's happening. People are racing. There's a lot of downloading of source and capabilities off the internet now, prompt engineering off the internet, a lot of different models, and we haven't really secured it very effectively. I use the example of 40 plus billion of deployed capital into what I call application AI development, and less than 200 million in securing those applications. 40 billion, 200 million. Anybody think there's a problem with that again? So that's the problem. But now you have the promise, real quickly, 1 minute on that, the opportunity of AI and what we can start to do. I've seen companies now that can create massive infusions of data into a large model to create faster detection and response and efficacy than we ever could before. So SOC automations, ability to know everything happening on the internet. I have a company called Data Miner and take in 1 million feeds a day of multimodal, meaning video, sound, images, and text in 150 languages, parse it, and give us almost 100% accuracy to events that are happening on the dark net, surface net, somewhere, physical and cyber, and do it like that. I mean, we never had tools like this. So the opportunity to catch up is there, but boy, we got to catch up. I always say, what did the mama tomato say to the baby tomato when they were crossing the road?
What's up?
Right. So, we got to catch up. And the mama tomato got to get ketchup to happen. So, here we are in that world.
So you mentioned space, and space is an area that's near and dear to my heart. It's kind of where my company was born out, as far as at that time it was Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg and now Space Force. When you kind of look at the applications of this in space, where do you see this next leap for cyber when it comes to space? Because we're starting to operate in a different domain in this case. We've got lots of old space stuff out there, but still doing critical items, and you got a bunch of new, and now you got an extremely large mix now of commercial and DoD and intelligence and stuff. What's been kind of your vision at this point in time as far as addressing some of those areas in space that our government is looking at this point, and then also the commercial space is looking at?
This is another scary opportunity, but interesting opportunity on a lot of fronts too. This race to space has been incredible. In my time here over the last 3-4 years, watching the amount of new satellites launched in the low Earth orbit has been incredible. I mean, the history of satellite production, we launched, I think, 1,800 satellites in 25 years, and we're launching thousands a year now. I mean, we've exponentially grown satellite infrastructure, many of which had the same problem I talked about with AI was, okay, who did security by design when it launched? And did we protect the way in which we could not only hack that satellite or interfere with man in the middle of submissions from Earth to ground stations, or create some sort of fake communications to that satellite? We now have satellite-to-satellite communication issues. Electronic warfare has become a big part of space. I don't know how much you've seen weaponry occurring now in space, but the rods from God are quite something to think about. They call them rod from gods. We now have 500x the nuclear power on Earth. We now have 500 times that in space with weaponry. I mean, put your head around that. And so, what we're facing now is these existential threats from space because technology is so much more advanced, and our adversaries, satellites, fly over our domestic grounds every hour, right? Or less than that now. So it's a whole new world of cyber risk, physical threat risk, different types. A lot of people don't realize how vulnerable we are to GPS from space and GPS poisoning, GPS timing, GPS kind of spoofing. We largely have GPS satellite, but those are old satellites. There's what's called these time protocols that can be interfered with now. Most of our infrastructure of planes and ships and cars are relying on it. So new vulnerabilities are discovered all the time. So I find myself in a position with NightDragon where we can deploy satellites for good to help protect the planet. We can help deploy capabilities to make sure we can't interfere with those satellites. And we're doing everything in our power to find the right companies to solve that risk and threat.
Yeah, it's a lot larger than I think that most understand. And like you said, just from the numbers where we're talking about exponential. Let's say it's just from the launches at Cape Canaveral. You went from like 25 launches in 1 year in 2000 to now you're going to over 200 launches per year, which is going to continue to grow.
And with like 60 satellites per launch, right?
Multi-payload launches where you can have 8 to 10 sitting in there or even more. It's a new space that's there. When we look at the innovators, then I believe that there is an advantage because you have a lot of companies, organizations that are used to innovating. It's just that they're not used to innovating within cyber. Are you finding that more and more these types of organizations are starting to seek you out or seek the companies in your portfolio out? And in those cases, are they still kind of like, hey, I'm just going to launch. We're just going to put it out there. Have you seen any movement in that in the last 3 years where they are more, apt to seek help in this area?
They are. I mean, I think everyone's starting to realize that the vulnerabilities were there. We need experts to solve that. Again, there was a lot of assets deployed to space before the epiphany, before the awareness of the risk. But having said that, it's gotten better and better. But we do have a lot of really important infrastructure that's already reliant on less secure satellite infrastructure. But we have a long way to go, and we need more. And we need more what I call multi-domain communications as well. I mean, space is one domain that talks to the land, but space talking to drones, drones talking to oceans, oceans talking to land, and coordinating to protect our world. My vision for NightDragon has always been can we deploy things in a multitude of companies that all these companies could work together? My space assets could work with my ocean assets, could work with my air, could work with my cyber. And a private company like NightDragon could begin to put together a signal intelligence platform that was very, very powerful and not beholden to a government. And now I could deploy capabilities for good. And we're doing that in Ukraine and Israel and the South China Sea today. Many of my companies are very active helping nations under duress in ways that the governments couldn't do or NATO couldn't do, but private sector could do because of how far advanced technology has become. So there's a lot of opportunity here, LoJo, to create platforms, use technology for good, and unite that technology across a lot of different companies in a way that could make the world a better place.
I think as far as expanding on that for some of our listeners, just realizing it's a close connection in terms of technology. For instance, Israel was a hotbed for innovation, and of course, Ukraine as well, just a tremendous technical apparatus that was there as far as both talent in tech, and then also in some of the companies that have been developed over there. Talk a little bit more about that, because I think it's important to understand the stewardship that's there too. We have our world, we have cyber. There is a stewardship to that as well. I think you're hitting on that with NightDragon, but yeah, could you go a little bit deeper into that as far as on how that partnering has kind of accelerated both the tech and innovation abroad as well as here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, for many years, I looked at America and Israel as really the two only innovation engines in the world of security tech. I don't want to just overstate it, but when you look at the number of cyber companies, defense tech companies that came from nations around the world, a large majority of it came from two countries that we could access, Israel and the United States. Of course, Russia produced its own. China eventually caught up too. But you largely look now in 2024, in the next few years, post-COVID, the world changed a lot from an innovation point of view because remote work started to happen. Reverse immigration started to happen. I use India as a great example of this. 5 years ago, pre-COVID, there was almost no cyber companies in India. There's 297 cyber companies in India now, born and raised in India, and 2 of them are unicorns already. And I think a third one coming. So like India's reverse immigration, all the learning through business process outsourcing and SOC augmentation has now created a generation that's now innovating. And that's happening in other parts of the world too, where we're suddenly seeing what was once outsourcing driving innovation. So now when you look at it from a NightDragon perspective, we see innovation in Europe, we see innovation in Ukraine coming, we see innovation in the Philippines, we see innovation in the South China area. So all over the world, a lot of people don't know this, but the company that I was CEO of, FireEye, was doing development. Most of their engineers came from Pakistan, and the founder was Pakistani. They had 83 engineers when I got there in Pakistan, Lahore, Pakistan. I mean, I mentioned the word Pakistan to the U.S. government, and the government allies are like, whoa, they're a risk, right? But we were able to source a company developed out of Pakistan into the United States for the good of the world. And this is really starting to happen now. So the good news is innovation has reached global levels. Technology and AI and quantum and the capabilities of the internet has really created that. Remote work has created that. So it's an exciting time for innovation too, I think, because we have the whole world helping, when as before it was largely a couple nations. Seems trying to be positive, LoJo.
Yeah, that's a quick positive answer there.
We could talk about the threat landscape as equally ominous all over the world too, but just fun.
We hear this a lot from the press as well as from media. I think there's millions and millions of articles that's out there. Primary fear, U.S. is falling behind in cyber and in technology. How do you respond to that?
Oh, I don't feel like we're falling behind at all. If anything, we've distanced the gap on most of the countries around the world because of this thing called AI and quantum. Mm-hmm. 2 new technologies have just completely changed the playing field, and largely American companies built those and innovated those. Yeah, you look at NVIDIA and what their platform has created has changed the world of how we have compute and storage with GPUs that are now, as a service. And we have, the greatest company in that in America. And that's true for a lot of other, areas of AI. So, but having said that, LoJo, you know this, we live in an asymmetric world. The United States technology is both its advantage and its disadvantage, because all that innovation and all that technology inertia creates the vulnerabilities. So we have the most vulnerabilities and the most technology, and it creates this problem, this symmetry problem that really makes us very, very vulnerable too. And hence why you see so many breaches, so many ransomware, so many threats happening, despite all this amazing technology that we have. So not all the nations are like that, right? China's market's much more closed. They're air-gapped a lot of systems early, stayed air-gapped. It's hard to find U.S. companies air-gapped, or at least, really air-gapped. So that creates vulnerabilities that are out there. So long-winded way of saying, the United States is really advanced with its capabilities, but it's really vulnerable with its technology too.
Yep. And we try to control as much as we can through compliance and different frameworks. What's your perspective on all this new compliance world that's supposed to protect us from advanced persistent threats? What conversations have you had where you're not sure of that, auditing that or assessing that's going to necessarily stop you from being breached? I see it on LinkedIn all the time. We have a breach. Well, they should have done this. They should have incorporated these controls. And then you're going, well, they were audited and they had those controls, but they still were breached. What's your thoughts on that? Let me just get your raw thoughts on it. I don't want to lead into this one.
So when I talk about the perfect storm of cyber earlier and all these threats and all these, technologies and attacker groups and geopolitical tensions, throw one more into it, which you just said, regulation. I created a map, and I wish I could show it to you, but it's a map of the world's regulations. So think about doing business in 100 plus countries, having hundreds and hundreds of permutations of regulation. Now you're a CISO or you're a company trying to adhere to all these regulations. I got this privacy regulation in France. Oh, it's a different one in Germany. Okay, I come over to the United States and I have states and I have federal and it's mind-boggling, right? So uniformity of regulation, it needs to happen. We can't have pockets everywhere. Now we're trying to regulate AI differently in every damn country. Yep. And it has created a perfect storm of regulation problem on top of the threat problem. And therefore, that's not healthy. So the pendulum kind of swung into a direction of too much regulation, too few uniform kind of messages of that regulation. And in America, we have 16 SRMAs. These are sector regulatory management agencies, SRMAs, all of which seem to be doing different regulation in cyber, not coordinating with each other. And that's just in the United States. So big problem. But compliance and regulation has to be in our vocabulary, or else we're going to have Enron, WorldCom, kinds of moments again, right? Where we really, could rely on that. So public-private partnership is critical. We need government together with sector, working together on the right regulation, with the right compliance, with the right literacy and education all together. And my best answer is, it's somewhere in between, where we are and where it needs to be. But, we need leadership around the world to try to drive this. But it's hard to see a world coming together on this, honestly. So we just have to kind of keep fighting the fight every day.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key attributes in recent years has been the term resilience. Like you said, we've got all these regulatory bodies. Privacy definitely throws a huge differences from a federal level to another state level. In that case, there are some differences that cause us headaches. With those, trying to find the synergies across the board, I think one of the most complicated things for us to address in the cyber industry is the fact that, look, you could do everything perfect and you could still get burned. It is a hard area. It's just like building a plane. You could build a plane, you could have every screw inspected, everything else done, but at the end of the day, if it's flying through the air and somebody shoots off the engine, okay, bad things happen. How do you respond to that from a resilience standpoint? And as you look at that from an organization standpoint of I can do it all perfect and we're still going to get hit, and being able to have both the industry understand that, users understand that, customers understand is that perception will drive additional regulation, where it's like, hey, we have enough, but do we have enough? No, we have enough regulation, but to your point, it has not been synergized, across the board. What do you think are some of the things that are going to be upcoming that will help to do that? Are there initiatives in place or initiatives that you've seen that are starting to address that area?
I do see them, and I'm hoping that we can move the ball forward on a lot of these. I've been really impressed with this administration's organization called CISA, which you probably know, our Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, our nation's cyber defense agency, has really tried campaigns to educate certain areas that just have to have controls, have to have compliance. Should we have two-factor authentication for our network? Definitely, right? I mean, single factor or single password kinds of environments is bad, right? So there's a bunch of controls. NIST has these controls, but they're guidelines, they're recommendations in most cases, and a lot of companies don't adhere to it. And I feel like we need certain amounts of controls that we could monitor that at least creates it tougher for the attackers to get into a network and access it. I hate to throw Snowflake under the bus, but an employee's credentials get stolen, a spearfish, and then they can access thousands of customers' data with one employee's credentials. Does anybody think that was a risk? I mean, come on. So, same with other breaches we've watched in that. But then having said that, there's the world of 0 days. At FireEye, I was finding a 0 day a week during my time at CEO, there, because we had technology that could discover it. But you can't stop a 0 day if nobody even knows the vulnerability exists, including the software company. How can I hold a company accountable for a breach when nobody knows about the exploit that could be occurred? So there's a certain amount that needs to happen, but then there's a certain amount of grace period where the government should protect you. We did that in the SolarWinds case largely, where Russian attackers were able to, very sophisticated attackers. I think those are areas where public-private partnership needs to come to help that company in that. But then you take others where, I hate to say, you can't stop stupid, but in some cases, people aren't careful about their hygiene, and that stupidity creates a breach, and that's inexcusable. So a certain amount, again, it's like porridge, got to have it just right.
I think it was a line in Iron Man where he's like, we need to get rid of the human element in our company.
It's where the error is, right? Yeah.
That's where the error was.
Man.
So we got maybe 6 minutes left. Two quick takeaways I wanted to try to see if I could extract from you. When we look at energy and the processing AI, I noticed over the last couple of years here that there's been restrictions, for instance, in Europe, as far as in the building of new data centers or additional data centers due to energy. What do you see as the relationship between, let's say, energy and AI at this point? Do you see a correlation?
Oh, I see a correlation. I think everyone sees a correlation if you're in the know of the amount of compute power, especially now applied to quantum and other capabilities coming in Horizon 1. Our future data centers, our ability to really scale our data centers, which all require tremendous energy sources, are really important. How we cool them, how we manage them, how we secure them, how we build them, where we build them, what's the supply chain to them, what's the risk of them. Wow, is this becoming important? I live in Arizona now, right? And most people wouldn't think, one of the heavens of the world of data centers has moved to the desert, but it has. And so mankind can innovate here and create data centers of the future, but that energy source is really important. And we see that. Think about autonomous, UAVs and surface vessels and things like that. They got to run on battery or solar. And, if we don't innovate in the area of energy, a lot of this technology will have very big limitations. Same with space, propulsion in space. What's the biggest limiter to a satellite's duration in space? Propulsion, right? And we need energy sources to create that. And our ability to really win the moon, right? We know in our generation, our lifetime, whoever wins the moon is going to have a very strategic piece of land, because the space stations on the moon will be able to do things that can affect our entire Earth, LEO, and GEO satellite infrastructure. So the race to the moon now has become so strategic for all nations. I wish we could cooperate on this, but this propulsion problem and energy problem you just talked about is the reason we're not on the moon in a big way too. So there's a lot of thinking where energy meets technology, meets risk. And to your point, I think it's one of our gating problems in the future if we don't solve that one and do it without fossil fuel and without, destroying our planet while we do it.
Yeah, and that it's an area of interest because I look at this and I go, okay, we are currently in a race with multiple countries in things like quantum processing, which is a ton of energy. And I always kind of look at it as we have another race for mutually assured destruction. When we look at the race from a quantum standpoint, the ability to sense faster, react faster, analyze faster, everything else that goes along with that. And I think as we continue to grow within that area, you may look at it and say, you know what, that's just another area of competition. But really, it's another area of vulnerability and threat for organizations. And that becomes even more global, I think, when it comes to energy, based on some of the things you just talked about as well, from space to everything.
What happened, if I could interrupt you for a second, look what happened. There was a pretty famous attacker called Volt Typhoon. Mm-hmm. And Volt Typhoon, Chinese actors basically went after our energy systems to test the resilience, to use that word again, and capabilities of our energy systems and water systems in remote geographies. But what were those remote geographies? Strategically located geographies, the data centers and other things.
Yes.
So supply chain risk to our energy and securing that energy could also fuel a lot of our compute capacity. And if you could take out some of that energy in a war planning capability, you just affected the entire supply chain. And so Volt Typhoon was a bit of a wake up for a lot of people to realize, again, America's infrastructure is very vulnerable too, even if we have all this technology. So may we live in interesting times. Here we are, right?
We do. Well, we're at the top of the hour here, Ben. Fantastic time having this discussion. I could probably talk for days with you on this stuff because interesting background, interesting perspectives. I think it's definitely one that provides a bit more clarity too in some of the areas that our listeners do want to explore and are interested in listening to. So love to have you back on sometime and look forward to the next time.
Thank you for having me, LoJo. Really appreciate it. Virtual fist bump. Thank you. And I'll see you next time. Yeah.
Dave, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the LoJo Show. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the evolution of cybersecurity threats to the innovative ways NightDragon is addressing these challenges across various industries. Your insights into the intersection of AI, quantum computing, and cybersecurity have given our listeners a lot to think about. Thank you for sharing your expertise and vision with us. For our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts on our social media. Stay tuned for more exciting discussions on the LoJo Show. Thank you again, Dave, and thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe and stay secure.